Thanks, Marissa. Hi, everyone. I'm Viet. I lead our customer talent advisory team here at GEM, and I'm really excited to introduce to you Becky Mohr, who will be talking about operationalizing your diversity hiring strategy. Becky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I am Becky Mohr, and like Viet said, I'm going to be talking about operationalizing your diversity hiring strategy. I'm a mom. I'm a soccer coach, and I excel at cardboard engineering, as you can see from those lovely Halloween costumes that my kids are wearing. I also have been in talent acquisition for over 15 years and leading sourcing for about 10. And this is what qualifies me to talk about this topic. For the last 5 years, I have been focused on diversity and inclusive hiring efforts. And through that, I've seen a lot of successes, a lot of failures. I have created some of my own failures. And I'm really excited because I'm living in a moment right now at SurveyMonkey where what we are doing is actually making a difference to diversify our hires. And so I'm just excited to share some of that with you. Okay, so let's set the stage. Why does operationalizing your hiring strategy matter for diversity? Okay, so do you remember when Post and Pray was innovative? It's a little crazy that there was a time when recruiting teams were scrambling to organize themselves around a Post and Pray model. And then there was a time when they were reorganizing to move away beyond that. But I'd like to submit to you that right now we are in a Post and Pray world when it comes to diversity hiring. Most companies think that the answer to their diversity hiring challenges is to post in new places. And while a few are going beyond that, what we're seeing is mostly tactical. Most companies have not fully operationalized a diversity strategy because doing so would mean breaking apart processes, systems, resourcing, and most talent acquisition teams just don't have the resources and they're not motivated well enough to be able to do that for diversity hiring yet. So in this presentation, I want to take you through SurveyMonkey's journey from moving from Post and Pray to dialing in on some operational elements of diversity hiring. We have a unique story at SurveyMonkey. Our CEO and our leadership had a profound reaction to the social justice unrest that followed the murder of George Floyd. And that resulted in an intense investment in diversity hiring efforts. And so our journey is kind of a unique test of what can you do, what works well, what doesn't work well when you have that top level buy-in. And I'll be walking you through 4 challenges we encountered and those solutions that we're using to overcome those challenges. But first, I do want to quickly give some context. At SurveyMonkey, our white and male and Asian colleagues are overrepresented in our employee population, while our Black, African, American, Latinx, and Indigenous colleagues are less represented against the communities where we work. So in this presentation, I'm going to be using the acronym URM, underrepresented minority. And I just want you to know that I don't love this term because I know that it places another label on people who consistently feel labeled by the majority. And I hope that you can just forgive me for choosing to use it anyway for the sake of brevity. And so the first problem that we tackled was this. Sourcers and recruiters cannot spend the same amount of time finding and engaging better talent faster and also increase the diversity of the talent that they are bringing in. The thing is, you know this, but hiring managers and your leadership probably don't really understand it because they're too far away from the task level work of recruiting. So what do you do when your team is asked to do exactly this? So we've solved this problem in 2 ways. One solution is that we hired dedicated diversity sourcers, but I'm going to come back to that later because in addition to that being a task level solution, it also does require a strategic resourcing discussion. The second solution is more task level. We created a diversity framework presentation. We began presenting data at the start of every search that showed individual hiring managers how different it would be to spend our time diversifying our pipelines. And then this data became the basis of a frank discussion with them about how we could spend our time. So the framework looks like this. First, we go over what our company's goals are and what the department and the team of this new role looks like in terms of representation. Next, we spend 30 minutes reviewing the talent landscape for this requisition, and we report out on approximately what percentage of the talent we see is female and what percentage is made up of underrepresented minorities. And then we talk about how much more volume there is to be researched, and we start to draw conclusions about the representation of this specific talent market. And lastly, we use that information to talk about what we could do to source more representation into our pipeline. And this is really for us a crash course for the hiring managers about the fact that keyword searching for rec requirements is different from community sourcing for underrepresented talent, and that those two things take different amounts of time. The result, this practice has front-loaded the discussion about how we, the sourcer, the recruiter, and the hiring manager, are going to spend our time, and it roots that decision in facts and the reality of our task level investment. It brings home the reality that we cannot find the best candidate faster and also build a diverse pipeline with the same amount of effort. It also has just prevented a last-minute scramble for token diverse candidates as part of the interview process. And it's given our hiring managers data that they can communicate upward, up the chain of command, about the investments that we're making in the search, and then also further investments that we might need. And lastly, we're seeing hiring managers be more willing to analyze their requirements for things like certifications or location when they have a true sense of what the hiring manager looks like from the beginning of the search. The second problem our teams face is answering the question, have you done enough to find an underrepresented minority candidate for this role? So a year ago, this question was between recruiters and hiring managers. But after our leadership's investment in diversity hiring, it became a question that our executives were also asking, and sometimes at really inconvenient times, like at the end of a search when we were ready to make an offer to a majority candidate. No matter who's asking this question, the problem is if you haven't operationalized your diversity hiring strategy, then it's really hard to know when you have done enough. So here's how we solve this problem. First, we introduced a 30-day diversity sprint for director and above roles and any other where the hiring manager can commit the time. We do not screen or source any candidates except underrepresented minorities, and in some cases females, for the first 30 days. I will tell you this is the thing that is making the biggest difference for us right now. The result has been qualified, diverse candidates interviewing for our roles early in our search process, often in the same week as our referral candidates or even internal candidates. In addition, we found that this practice busts myths, both our own as recruiters and our hiring managers, around whether or not it will be possible to find a diversity of qualified candidates for all job types, and I mean all. It also just is an authentic way of putting effort into diversifying our leadership at SurveyMonkey. To make an agricultural analogy, this practice is our first fruits. We put our first and best efforts towards finding the best, most qualified underrepresented candidates on the market. We deploy our best headhunting, creativity, and our alacrity on candidates who are the rarest and therefore the hardest to find. The opposite of doing this 30-day diversity sprint is just to unwittingly leave diversity sourcing as an afterthought every time. And I will say, we don't have data on this yet to support it, but we believe that this 30-day window is surfacing unconscious bias. It is giving hiring managers time the work that they need to do deep down, internally, inside, that someone might look different than the way that they expected, and that person is still the best choice for the role. As an aside, we started kind of making jokes around 5 stages of acceptance of the diversity hiring sprint, like, the 5 stages of grief that people experience surrounding death. Well, the 5 stages of acceptance begins with disbelief. We won't be able to do it. And it ends in delight. I cannot believe we are interviewing these awesome underrepresented candidates. Now, not every search can allow this much time. Not every search is executive. We also do really quick volume hiring at SurveyMonkey. And so for these, we've decided that 1 in 4 candidates we interview on site needs to be from an underrepresented race or ethnicity, and 1 in 4 needs to be female. This is a simple approach. It's a simple approach. It's a rule. It keeps our efforts honest. It is not lazy. It is hard. Because when majority candidates continue to roll through our process coming from applications and referrals, this rule forces our efforts back to doing everything we can to develop diverse pipelines. Operationally, the way we handle this is by using GEM's functionality that shows us the percentage of candidates in our pipelines who are likely male versus female, or likely white versus Black versus Latinx. So using this, we're able to dial into each stage of our pipeline and view whether the percentages at each stage, as you can see in this picture, are likely to yield a 25% interview rate at the end of the funnel. And we can adjust as we need as we're looking at those stages. So the result of this, first of all, was an immediate increased feeling of belonging and inclusion for our underrepresented and female employees. The difference from going from an undefined number of diverse candidates to a 1 in 4 rule meant that our underrepresented employees saw more people who looked like them in interviews at a rate that was high enough that we received totally unsolicited positive feedback about the change we had made. Another result is our hiring managers and our hiring teams are internalizing the reality that sourcers cannot bring in the best candidates faster and also more diverse representation of candidates at the same time. They understood, and then they started advocating that sourcers take away time from finding great majority candidates to do the difficult work of finding great underrepresented candidates. Continuing from above, our executives understand now that when sourcers and recruiters have to focus on creating more diversity at the top of our funnel, we end up slowing down our hiring velocity at the bottom of the funnel. And in response to that, they advocated for more sourcing time and resource to be dedicated to diversity sourcing. In other words, our chief revenue officer asked our finance team to increase our sourcing team staff, not so that we could hire more people, but so that we could hire different people at SurveyMonkey. And this is huge. Okay, so speaking of hiring velocity, everything I've described so far slows down hiring velocity. So it would have been a major problem for us to implement all these ideas without some sort of solution for hiring that much more slowly all the time. We began to ask ourselves, how can we speed it up? How can we most efficiently bring in a diversity of candidates in our funnel more quickly? Our answer was to add 3 dedicated diversity sourcers to our team. This is what I mentioned before. So our team is about 25 recruiters, 8 sourcers, 3 of whom are now focused on diversity. Now, I want you to bear with me for a minute, because I've been in the position of watching a presentation and thinking, well, that's not helpful because I'll never get the resource to do that. So I'm going to come back and talk about resourcing. As you bear with me, here's where we go. We dedicated 3 people on our talent acquisition team to diversity sourcing. We then divided up our company in a way that made sense among those sourcers. For us, one has sales and customer success, one has engineering and product, and one has our CIO org and some of our really difficult to fill engineering roles. And then we gave those 3 sourcers a mandate, which was this: talk to any underrepresented talent who appears to be qualified for a role that we could potentially hire in the next 6 months. And then we gave them goals to support that mandate. We focus mainly on activity, talking to qualified prospective candidates. And this is the space the prospective space that no recruiter in our normal model had time for. And then each week, 2 of the people that we speak to get showcased out to our hiring managers across the business. The point of these showcases is to introduce the people who make hires to qualified, diverse talent that they could hire in the next 6 months. So I just want to explain this chart. If you look at the purple column, this is what our quarterly hiring metrics looked like for our recruiters before. So engineering recruiters would hire about 8 per quarter, G&A and sales recruiters would hire about 13 for a total of 21. When our leadership started to give us the authority to really put a focused effort on diverse hiring, what we saw was that our engineering recruiters dropped that number to about 5, and our G&A and sales recruiters dropped that to about 7 to 9 hires per quarter each, because they were spending so much more time working on diverse pipelines. But when we added a diversity sourcer to that pod, they took some of the lift of those task level engagements from those recruiters. And so we saw our numbers go back up, engineering hiring about 7, G&A and sales hiring about 10. And then on top of that, the diversity sourcers who were doing prospective screening were able to bring candidates into the pipelines at a rate of about 2 diverse hires per quarter. And so our numbers got back up to 19. All in all, we didn't get our velocity all the way back up, but it's a lot better than it was without the sourcer. So this was our first result, getting our hiring velocity higher than it had before and back up closer to where it had been. Also, at the end of a year of doing this, we will have spoken to 1,200 underrepresented and female candidates who are interested in SurveyMonkey. And this just builds our brand in a very grassroots way within the communities where we believe it's important. We also are introducing our hiring managers to 300 qualified underrepresented and female candidates over the course of the year before they even ask. And our hiring velocity turns out to be much faster for the recs where we have done prospective sourcing. Here's an example. We started these diversity sourcing efforts in July. In September, a rec came open. We had already spoken to 4 people who matched the job description of the rec that came open. The hiring team ended up liking 2 of these people so much that they got the authorization to hire 2 people instead of 1. And so the time to fill for those recs was 5 days. And then the same thing happened in October. Now, I quickly just want to circle back on the roadblock of finding the resources to make this kind of investment into diversity recruiting. Here's the thing. As a talent acquisition leader, it is in your hands to convince your leadership team or your finance team that a talent acquisition org cannot hire more diverse talent with the same amount of resource. You have to sit down and show someone, if you have to sit down and show someone how Boolean works, then that's what you have to do. Show them. Now, once you've done that, if your organization truly believes that diversity is important, they have to be willing to change their models regarding recruiter capacity. And once they change their models, you will get additional resource. And then you'll need to use it for prospective sourcing and relationship building. And then you'll need to give your teams metrics to hold them accountable for using their time that way. Okay. Last challenge. When we started to focus on diversity, we started to hear that a lot of people were not satisfied with our referral process, particularly our underrepresented employees, because we rejected candidates who were not a fit for our roles right then. The truth is, we really had no plan for tracking candidates who might be qualified for a future role. We hoped that the employee would just re-refer, but that is definitely not the best way for us to be handling rare, underrepresented talent. So our solution was to implement a diversity referral process. In the process, if a referral from an underrepresented group is rejected from an open position, then the referral is reviewed by one of our diversity sourcers. The sourcer then uses their mandate, which is to talk to anybody who might be a hire in the next 6 months. And so then they offer an informational interview to these referrals. This process has filled a huge gap in our previous referral process. Our diversity sourcers are forward-looking and relationship building, which are exactly the people you want talking to your referrals. Additionally, our stakeholders feel encouraged to refer more because they know that prospective candidates are accepted. And lastly, prospective referrals means we're getting a head start on talent before they're really out on the market. Okay, so in conclusion, if you want diverse hiring to happen, you have to operationalize your TA team for these goals. As a leader, it's important that your budget, your resourcing, your processes, and the expectations that you're setting with your stakeholders reflect those goals. So some very simple steps that you can start tomorrow include kicking off every single search with data and a frank discussion about task level diversity tactics for that role. Feel free to copy our diversity framework. Second, refuse to make diversity hiring an afterthought by starting searches with a diversity sprint. Ours is 30 days. Maybe yours will be 60 days. Maybe it will be 2 weeks. And then make rules about the percentage of underrepresented candidates in your pipelines at various stages, and then hold your teams and your partners accountable to those. More complex steps that might require funding or discussion include carving out time or resource on your team for prospective relationship building conversations. Create metrics that hold your team accountable to that use of their time. And lastly, solve for caring for diverse pipelines. Our biggest challenge was treating diverse referrals with the value that they deserved. But maybe your challenge is different or hits a different part of your pipeline. Whatever it is, make sure that someone in your organization is incentivized to further those more rare relationships. Thank you so much for being interested enough to listen. I'm going to put my email address on the next slide, and just know I'm definitely up for keeping this discussion alive. So, Viet, are you there?
Yeah, Becky, thank you so much. That was incredible. I feel like my two big takeaways was one, the work your team's doing, shedding light on how hard recruiting teams are working to build diverse teams, to our cross-functional partners, and I think, and they're also starting to like recognize it, not just hiring managers, but also interviewers, that they see like, oh, we're actually bringing in more diverse talent to even evaluate. And two is, I completely agree. You can't keep bringing your recruiters to get more out of them. Like, you frankly just can't hire faster and more diverse with the same number of resources. And so I think there's just two really good reminders when we go and have to present like, hey, we need more sources of recruiting support if you want to do these things. That said, we have a ton of questions from the audience. One of the questions that stuck out to me was, you talked about, or one of the questions rather, is you talked about a 30-day diversity sprint. I'm wondering if you post your recs during that time or you wait until the 30 days is over.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because that is something that we struggled with. In fact, I would say it was a failure that we had along this journey. So when we first started this off, we did not want to post the role in that 30-day sprint because we didn't want to be distracted by applications coming in and needing to review those and then potentially diluting our pipeline. So we decided we would not post the role. But what we heard from our employees at SurveyMonkey was, that just was not transparent, because they would hear about a role being open and then pipeline's already going and they're like, what? We didn't even know that role was open. And secondly, it kept them from being able to refer diverse candidates during that 30-day sprint. So where we have landed is that we do post the role and we review applications, but we don't talk to them. We schedule those conversations with good applicants or good majority referrals after the 30-day window is over.
Yeah, I completely agree. Once you open up the funnel, the very top of the funnel, with applicants, you effectively lose control over who you talk to, because in the day you can't not talk to somebody because of who they are. And so I think being smart about the timing of when you open up the application funnel and who you open up to is incredibly important. Here's actually another question that came in. As somebody who was previously a recruiting manager, tracking how your team is doing using metrics is super important. I'm curious, one of the questions that came up that I'm also curious about is like, what metrics do you use to track the performance of your diversity sourcers?
Yeah, so our diversity sourcers have totally different metrics than what we call our functional sourcers. For functional sourcers, I love metrics that are focused on outcome. With our diversity sourcers, though, we're giving them the flexibility not to be so focused on outcome, but to be focused on process. And so then we're using activity metrics. The metric that we look at the most closely is their screens per week. And we think that that's really important, because by setting that bar high and saying we want you to get out there and talk to people, it also forces them to be pretty creative about how they are identifying diverse pools of candidates, and then also how they are engaging those candidates. It kind of pushes them to get away from, this person wants to come work at SurveyMonkey next month, so that's a valuable conversation for me, and pushes them to talk to people who may not be interested in us right now because they don't want to change jobs, but might be 6 months down the line. Yeah.
I feel like cultivating relationships, especially for diverse candidates, is so important, because it means a limited pool of candidates to begin with. And so it's not going to be as transactional as maybe some of the other roles we support, where you do one thing and it leads to another. Sometimes it takes time, and you have to, like, again, cultivate these relationships. And that actually segues perfectly into like this next question around referrals. What can you do, or are you doing, to incentivize a recruiter to have a relationship with a referral candidate that they can't hire right away?
Yeah, so normally in sourcing, in my functional sourcing team, referrals are not something that I value for those sourcers. I want them going out and finding people. We have changed that equation with our diversity sourcers. So our diversity sourcers own those relationships, which is great. Somebody in your organization needs to own them. And then the way that we're incentivizing them is that if they screen a diverse, an underrepresented or female referral, that counts towards that screen goal that I just talked about per week. And so I like that, because I want them to want to talk to great referral candidates that aren't a fit for a job right now. I want them to be keeping that person in mind then down the line and hoping that they get hired. I also want them to go out and talk to our employees and try to generate more diverse referrals. I am happy for them to spend a lot of time scouring the internet, but if there are already really rich networks within our employee base, it's just that those people are prospective. I want them going out and talking to those folks.
I feel like between this past question and the question before that is incredibly helpful for recruiting managers, because the idea that we have to bring on diversity sourcers, but we as managers also are learning how to effectively manage them. What activities do we encourage? How do we track their performance? And so this next question is really focused on how do we manage up? So what are some of the things that we can what are the things we can do to make sure that diversity sourcing or diversity recruiting priorities stick when hiring increases mid-quarter or when we're behind? Because I feel like it's one of the first things that go if you don't plan for it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So we are living in that moment right now. We are looking at what our Q1 hiring is going to look like for 2021. We're going to be on fire, which is great. But as we start to figure out, like, how are we going to handle that in Q1? Of course, one of the first things that gets on the table is like, well, should we move some of our really great diversity sourcers over to focus on functional sourcing? The thing that I've got in my back pocket right now, and so I would encourage everybody about this, is that we've been really public about this diversity sourcer strategy. We put it out there with our executives. We've said this is how we're increasing our efforts for diversity hiring. And so that publicity around what we're doing is going to make it really hard for our executives to put that on the chopping block. We are ultimately going to go to them with a suite of options, one of which will include chopping diversity sourcing, and I'm just trusting that that is not going to be the decision that they make. I will say one thing, if I can encourage you, I did not go really public with our entire employee base about what we're doing. Part of it's that like we're doing something new, let's see what happens before we tell everybody about it. I wish we had told everybody about it because it's working, and the more people who know about it, the harder it makes it to chop. And it's something that our employees care about.
Yeah, accountability, right? Well, that's all the time we have for questions. Becky, thank you again for this amazing session. Everyone, please have a great rest of the day at Gem Summit. We'll see you soon.